Learn to live with the virus. This has been drummed into our ears by health authorities. Yet, Ghana's COVID-19 cases are not reducing as expected. Currently, a total of 7,881 COVID-19 cases have been confirmed, with 2,841 recoveries and 36 deaths. Currently, the active cases stand at 5,004. With these statistics in mind, will it be safe for the easing of restrictions on social gathering, education, religious gathering, and also opening of the country's borders? The president will speak tonight. So stay with us, because we have the Information Minister, Joynews tv, on this show, who may just drop some subtle insights right here before the presidential address. Frontline workers have inundated our social media pages with this question.
I want to ask the Information Minister when the 50% the president promised is going to be delivered.
We've also been asking you about whether you're ready for the easing of restrictions.
We have two, you say ban. Then we have 1,000 and going up, and you say lift or ban. Which is which?
Remember, Beyond the Lockdown is about you, so get interactive via WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. Send your questions in. All the nagging questions about COVID-19 will be directed to the Information Minister, Joynews. Beyond the Lockdown is live on the Joynews channel, which is free to air on all digital platforms: DSTV channel 421, GoTV channel 144, on Joy Prime. Also, at the top of the hour 8, Joy FM listeners on 99.7 FM will also join us, plus the affiliates, a dozen of them across the country, also on myjoyonline.com. You can also watch the show live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. At this point, you need to call a friend to tune in to Beyond the Lockdown, where you get answers to all questions that is bugging you. Please stay. And thanks so much for staying with us here on Beyond the Lockdown on the Joynews channel. Like I said, we're also on DSTV channel 421, GoTV channel 144, Joy Prime. At the top of the hour 8, Joy FM listeners will join us. Joy 99.7 FM. They come with a dozen affiliates across the country. We're also live on Facebook, on YouTube, and all our social media platforms. Information Minister Joynews tv is my guest tonight in the studios. Welcome, Mr. Joynews.
Thanks, MF. How are you doing? I'm okay. How are you doing?
It's been a while. I hope you're doing well.
I'm
yeah.
okay.
Okay. So, first off, the president is speaking tonight?
Yes, as at the time I left the Jubilee House, the plan was that the president would speak tonight. Mm-hmm. The team at the Jubilee House will put out the exact time for the address, but that was the plan as at the time I left to your studios. Mm-hmm. If it does change, we will be alerted, but currently that's the plan.
So there was a flyer saying that it was at 9:30.
I think that flyer is one of the fake elements that you see around. I do know that the social media team at the Jubilee House has not put out a flyer. So what you are seeing out there is a fake. They will do an announcement if all plans go in accordance with what has been structured. They will do an announcement, and we'll have an opportunity to clear it up, hopefully before the show is over.
We have a big announcement tonight. Today is 31st of May.
Yes, today is the 31st of May.
We are easing restrictions.
The president himself has signaled that it will be important to examine how to ease some of the restrictions. In the last about 3 weeks or so, he's been engaging with lots of stakeholder groups on how to ease some of the restrictions. So generally, he'll give us an update on where we are with our COVID-19 response program. But don't be surprised if he announces some elements of easing in some specific areas.
I like the sound of that. I'll be going to some Vox. We've been speaking to some people on their expectations when it comes to easing of restrictions, but I'll stay on that because there have been a number of engagements. I know that you've been engaging stakeholders. Tell us the extent of those engagements.
Oh, it's been a very extensive stakeholder engagement period for the last about 3 weeks or so. Religious groups, employers, education, group workers, some elements of civil society groups, etc. Very extensive engagement. And the reason for this engagement has been about 3 or 4-fold. Today, the science and the data that deals with the dynamics on the virus tells us that in Ghana, we are not having high mortality rates, even though our cumulative case count has gone up. And our active case count is also up, I think somewhere around 5,000 or so. And it is largely because of the kind of surveillance mechanism we've put in place, both the general surveillance and the enhanced surveillance. We've also got a very strong set of layers for protecting the Ghanaian population. One, the closure of the borders, which limits or cuts out vertical importation. Two, the restrictions on movement. And then three, the preventive etiquette, which we've been preaching, and a good semblance of the Ghanaian community is complying with, although there are still a lot of people who are not complying with. We must be very honest. These three levels have contributed, in addition to the case management approach. They've contributed to a situation where we're not having very high mortality rates. One death is still one too many, but at about 36 out of almost nearly 8,000 or so, our dynamics are a bit different from what is happening in the world. The world has also come to a certain realization that, to the extent that a virus, an antivirus has not been found, or a cure has not been found, the virus will continue to be in the ecosystem, the global ecosystem, for a while. So if the virus is in the global ecosystem, we have a low mortality rate because of how we are managing it here in Ghana, and a perpetual lockdown, or a lockdown ad infinitum, is not a solution in itself, then it stands to reason that we must find some middle ground where we can ease up for people to live some sense of normalcy and at the same time protect the general population. It's in the midst of this that the president has been engaging, taking feedback. Various proposals have come to the table. We may have opportunity to discuss some of them, especially in the area of education. Some of them absolutely make sense. Some of them are not backed by science and prudence, and we've had opportunity to explain. My colleague, the Honorable Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, has led an extensive engagement. They've had opportunity to explain to the education community what is feasible and what's not feasible. And we have come to some semblance of a middle ground, based on which, if nothing changes, His Excellency the President should be updating us on where we are. And as I mentioned earlier, you should not be surprised if you hear him begin to ease up one or two of the restrictions.
Okay, we would wait for that, but of course there will be questions along that line that will come. But I must say that we're observing all the social distance and protocols in the studio, for which reason we're both not wearing masks tonight. So for those of you already questioning and asking why we are not wearing masks tonight, I must say that we are observing all the safety and social distancing.
There's about 2 meters apart.
Of course.
So we're fine.
So we're fine in the studios. But one issue, talk about safety protocols. Jaso and Obo's father. This weekend, there was a funeral because we're expecting it to be a burial. But there's a question on that as well. Then we'll take that first question and then I'll come to you.
I want some clarification on this. We heard over the weekend that Obo, the musician, was given permission to go and bury his dad in the Ashanti region. But we were told some time back that people who died from coronavirus the bodies were not given to their families to bury. That was from the Ghana Health Service. So why was Obo given that permission? What protocol did he follow and what arrangement? Because the Ghana Health Service in the Ashanti region, the directorate said they were not aware, they didn't get any permission, any information that Obo was coming to bury the father who tested positive after he died some few weeks ago. They want to know what arrangements did they do. And if he is aware, we have different rules for different people in this country, because other people were also ready to go and bury their people. So why did they do that? What protocol did they follow? The information minister must give us that clarification.
I'm Nicholas Ben from Fresby Senior High School, Asante Achimbomata. Minister, please, will the students and teachers be screened when school reopens? And when that is done, will the teachers be provided with PPEs? And finally, why is it that the universities in Ghana, most of them are not reducing their fees? Why students are at home doing online courses? Thank you.
After government relieving the SMEs with stimulus packages, what is the government's position on customers' lock-up funds with the revoked fund management companies after months of validation by the Securities and Exchange Commission without nothing said to customers?
Please, MFR, I want you to tell the Honorable Minister, since he being the mouthpiece for the country, to advise the President not to open schools now, since our kids will be very vulnerable, especially knowing how kids are at school. The social distancing protocols cannot be observed, especially people from crèche to the nursery.
those were the first batch of questions. So the issue I was raising with you, my colleague Erastus Asaredonko was at JASO over the weekend, also reporting. You heard that question from the first person also. How did that happen?
So if I listen to the question well, your questioner says that, and I'm quoting his words, he says that he has heard that Obuo was given permission to bury his father, which person is believed to have died of COVID-19. There are three key elements in that question. First of all, what he has heard, I'm not sure you'll be able to validate as any official communication coming out that X person has been given permission to bury his father for XYZ reasons. Number two, this whole question of permission to bury his father will come in if indeed this person died of COVID-19 as established or as validated, and if indeed it is established that it was a COVID-19 related death, and the Ghana Health Service is supposed to be in charge of burials, then you can proceed on that assumption. As I sit before you now, I do not have any brief that says that Obuo's father is validated to have been a COVID-19 related death. Do you have any such validation?
That's what we're told, because unless you're telling us now that that is in doubt, that Obuo's father did not die of COVID-19.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I do not have any brief to that effect. Do you have a brief to that effect?
That's what we've been told.
By who?
Of course. And we've checked with the Ghana Health Service, and what we're told, we've checked with the Ridge Hospital where the father was and all, where he was kept, where he died actually. And we're told that the Ghana Health Service, together with Ridge and the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, supervise that exercise. The Ridge handed over the body to the Accra Metropolitan Authority, which is the Public Health Directorate of the AMA, and they supervised the burial from what we've gathered.
So this is a burial that was, from your sources, this is a burial that was supervised by the Ghana Health Service.
And the Accra Metropolitan
Assembly. Well, I do not have a brief to that effect as I speak to you. So operating on your brief, that this is a burial that was supervised by the Ghana Health Service and the Accra Metropolitan Authority or Assembly, it will be possible to interrogate whether they did it in accordance with plan or any plan was breached. Now, the second thing is whether indeed there was a funeral, because what is allowed is private burials of not more than 25 persons. Is that what happened? I don't have the facts. I've been in a lot of meetings all over the weekend. I don't have those facts. So was it a private burial of not more than 25 persons, or did they have a funeral?
I'm sure my producers will let us call for that report by my colleague Erastus Asaredonko shortly, and then we can...
They won't even derogate from my submission, but it will be good to have that. If it was a private burial of not more than 25 persons, and as you were saying, it was under the supervision of the Ghana Health Service and the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, then there wouldn't be anything wrong. But if it was not a private burial of not more than 25 persons, and they proceeded to have a funeral will be in breach of the restrictions that have been imposed. So just to clarify, as I said before you, my office does not have a brief that says that this is a COVID-19 related death. You are informing me that you've had that confirmation. Second matter is the fact that what they are supposed to have is a private burial and not a funeral. If indeed what they had is a private burial of not more than 25 persons, then they should be fine. But if they proceeded to exceed those 25 persons, or they proceeded to have a funeral, then they will be in breach of the restrictions, and the security agencies will have to act accordingly.
Well, quickly watch that report from my colleague Erastus Asaredonko.
Obuo's father, Nana Osei Buensi Kufuor, who is also chief of the Oyoko clan of Jaso, was declared dead on March 27th this year at the Ridge Hospital in Accra after testing positive for COVID-19. 2 months after his death, his body was transported from Accra to Jaso, his hometown, at the weekend in a grand style.
Yesterday marked the burial of the father of Bice Osei Kufuor, popularly known as Obuo, the past president of Musiga.
In an unusual burial protocol for COVID-positive cases in the Shanti region, he was laid in state at his family house with mourners filing past. Family members kept vigil and performed burial rites before he was buried at the Royal Cemetery at Jaso. All this was done without the participation and knowledge of the regional and municipal health directorates. The Regional Health Director, Dr. Emmanuel Tinkrine, tells Love News regional COVID teams were not aware of the burial. Municipal Chief Executive for Asante Achim South, Alexander Frimpong, denies knowledge of the burial. But Obuo's family say they had permission from authorities. Agnes Esiama Boache is sister to the deceased. We were told he died of COVID-19. There were rumors that he has been cremated because of his COVID-19 status. Because he's a chief, we sought permission from authorities for few people to come around and identify and pay their last respects. We bought a coffin made of a glass covering, so it prevented people from getting into direct contact with the body. At Jaso, many doubt the positive COVID-19 status of Nana Osei Buensi, Obuo's father.
So that's Erastus Asaridonko's report over the weekend from Jaso. Yeah. There you have it.
Yeah. So it's clear what the reporter on the ground is saying, that though the local health authorities say they don't have a brief on it, just like how I'm telling you, my ministry doesn't have a brief on it, and I like to speak to what I have briefs on.
Okay.
They are also explaining that the Ghana Health Service, or like you're telling me, Ghana Health Service and AMA were supposed to have been involved. So I think there are two elements here. If it was a private burial of no more than 25 persons, which I don't see necessarily addressed in this report, then they won't have a problem. If it was in excess of 25 persons, they will be in breach. If they proceeded to have a proper funeral where they sit down and they have all of this elaborate, what we call in tree drinking of the sikansa and all of those ones, then they will be in breach. If it wasn't and it was just the burial, then they will not be in breach. So it will be important for the elements to be examined to come to a certain position on it.
So we'll wait when you get that proper briefing on this particular issue. But there are other questions that came in, students and teacher screening whilst when we ease the restrictions if schools open. Will that
this is one of the things that, if I may use the word hint, that I hinted at about things that were not feasible and were not prudent. Because you have about 9.5 million Ghanaian children in various educational institutions. You have from kindergarten to junior high school, then you have senior high school, you have tertiary, and then beyond then you have a number of professional institutions, fisheries, accountancy, several of them on the flanks. Put it all together, about 9.4 million people who are having some sort of formal education in Ghana. If indeed a test costs about $50 per head, what does it mean to test 9.4 million people at a go? That's the first question. And it's not even about costing. The real issue is that you can test negative today, and by the time you are leaving this testing space, you can contract it at the door and test positive tomorrow morning. So if indeed you test everybody, let's say once before schools reopen, what does it mean? Are you testing daily? Are you testing weekly? Are you testing monthly? The question, therefore, is that what is the real value of that test in the preventive structure that you are putting in place? So indeed, initially, it was one of the proposals that test everybody. But as we went through the process and explained that, listen, testing at $50 per head for 9.4 million people, multiplied by how many times, has to be put in context, and then you examine the feasibility as against other measures of protecting students. It is becoming clear that mandatory testing of everybody who is going into school is not feasible. That is even on the assumption that everybody is going into school. So you would notice that if indeed some of the discussions that have taken place concretize in the final decision measures, you will not be having a mandatory testing of everybody who is going into school, if indeed everybody is going to school, because the realities are that the testing itself is not a preventive mechanism. Testing may help us to manage risks, But the question is, are there other ways of managing the risk beyond mandatorily testing every one of the 9.4 million people who are going to go into school?
I'm sure these will inform the decisions that the president will be taking. Because we've heard some health education experts say that we should stagger the process. We shouldn't open all at once. But we'll get more on that. But someone is also asking, the final one was also on education, asking that you advise the president not to open schools now. And that's...
The president has been very concerned about a number of things. One is the fact that we have a cohort of young Ghanaians who are supposed to be getting instruction, education, examination administration by now. Which cohort we are not sure are getting that necessarily with the online and distance education that is ongoing. We're not sure. There are studies that have been programmed into testing and is ongoing. And he's very worried that these persons may have some part of their academic life negatively affected by what is going on. That's in one breath. In another breath, he is also very worried about the safety of Ghanaian children if you do decide to ease up some sort of restrictions on education. Yeah. What the president will be doing, if I am reading him right, and if I'm following his analysis and the questions he's putting to everybody right, beyond these or between these two concerns, is a fair balance that allows for some key cohorts the need for them to have the kind of, is it education or is it examination or is it instruction? And at the same time to ensure that the most important thing, safety, is not compromised. Yeah. And how any president calibrates this balance becomes the test of your judgment, the test of your sensitivity, the test of your leadership. So if indeed, as I was saying, he speaks to us tonight in accordance with the plans before I left the Jubilee House, what will be important to test is how he would have managed that balance between ensuring that people's education and instruction and examination is not significantly hampered, and at the same time you don't put students and teachers and non-teaching staff at risk. How you walk that line as a leader, posterity will judge you. And we'll see how President Akufo-Addo comes to that position.
Remains to be seen. Now let's go into the second batch of questions for the evening. So this one is a Facebook question, a WhatsApp question, I should say. This one says, my question for Honorable Minister is if school, with Nana Kwame Sidu's question, how effective testing has been and those who are asymptomatic, what we're doing around
I mean, we've done over 200,000 tests currently. We're one of the leading countries in Africa to be testing, if you look at per million of our population. And the testing regime has been very rigorous and effective. Remember, we said we didn't want to quickly run into RDT tests, which are testing for antibodies, essentially. That is testing for persons who have demonstrated a recovery or an ability to fight against it. But you wanted to actually test for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is what causes the COVID-19 condition, as we are talking about. The testing has been in two parts. The general surveillance, that is people who show symptoms and come to health facilities and are tested. And then the enhanced surveillance, which is very different from what many countries are doing, where we go out into what we call at-risk populations to test and find persons mostly who are asymptomatic. What it means is that they have not fallen sick, but they have been exposed to the virus. What it means is that you can quickly isolate them and give them supportive treatment, and their chances of recovery are high and fast. Because if they are not sick, and there's a difference between being physically sick and having been exposed to the virus. Yeah. If they're not physically sick, then your chances of giving them the kind of supportive treatment for them to recover are higher. And that is why in Ghana, you haven't had a lot of people need ventilators and ICU treatments, which is very different from what you've seen in Italy and Spain and UK and America and other parts of the world. So again, there's some value to the particular model that we're using, but it's been effective. Indeed, the majority of the numbers that you're seeing from Ghana's case count are from the enhanced surveillance, which means we're testing at-risk populations and finding persons who have been immediately exposed. For example, the persons who came on the flights from Kuwait, about 231 of them, if my data is correct, about 35 of them have tested positive, despite the fact that we were initially hinted that they have tested negative. But 35 of them have tested positive, and they are not sick. You cannot see physical manifestations of sickness. But it is when you find this early that you can then give them supportive treatment. So it has been effective in ensuring that you can quickly find these people, isolate them and treat them. Because if you didn't, because they are fine and they're in the general population and engaging with everybody else, what will happen is that they'll end up infecting a lot more people. Even if you knew what you call your R rate, that is the rate of spread, they'll be infecting a lot more people by the time you recognize it. So in other jurisdictions, by the time they see, let's say, 1,000 in the hospitals from general population, it means that there are about 4,000 to 5,000 people in the general population which haven't come forward. In our case, when you see 7,881, that's a combination of those who've come forward and those we've gone to find. Okay. And if a good chunk of them are people who were not sick, people who were not symptomatic, it means we've taken out the potential of them multiplying the infections in the general population. So simply speaking, it's been very effective. We have to keep doing a lot more of it and ensure that we find persons early and give them supportive treatment so that we can cut into the severity or the potential severity of the virus's dynamics here in Ghana.
Okay, so there's a question on recoveries and what we're using to treat them, because we have a number of recoveries recorded. Yes. What exactly are we doing?
So I've said over and over again that it is not our business to be trying to even predict which sort of medication they are using, because there's a risk there. When you start mentioning some of the medications on television and on radio, like what happened in Nigeria some time back after President Trump has mentioned hydroxychloroquine, you find people trying to buy off-the-shelf versions of it and trying to self-medicate. We don't want that. What we're saying is that if you are feeling ill or if you've been discovered as positive, make yourself available to the doctors and let them give you the kind of supportive treatment. It's a combination of immune boosting things and, depending on the severity, some other things they may want to give you. But what is important is that you make yourself available and you comply, and they give you the kind of supportive treatment that you require. Okay. And thankfully, it's borne fruit for us so far.
Well, there's a question also on the 50% incentive for frontline health workers.
Yeah, so, and I heard him asking whether it's about frontline or etc. My understanding of what has been announced so far is that it is in 3 layers. There are 3 layers of health incentives that President Akufo-Addo has announced in this time of crisis. First is that all health workers are supposed to get this tax-free benefit that is going to health workers. Second is that for the frontline health workers, and that has been decided between the Ghana Health Service, the Ghana Medical Association, etc., what the concept frontline health workers means. For those who are dealing with all of these cases, they are going to get a 50% top-up, salary top-up. I do not have a brief that it has been paid yet.
So that's the 31st?
Yeah, I don't have a brief that it has been paid yet. When I do have that brief, we'll do well to share it. Indeed, it created some confusion somewhere around even Noguchi, where people were handling samples and were asking, where is our 50%? Yes, but I don't have a brief that it has been paid yet. And then there was another layer, which was 150 Ghana cedis per head per day, I think, to those who were doing the contact tracing, the enhanced contact tracing, who were following up, going to homes, etc. These are the various layers that have been announced. And I'm sure once they start full execution of it, the data will be made available to us as well.
Okay. Still beyond the lockdown here on the Joy News channel, and we welcome our Joy FM listeners, Joy 99.7 FM listeners, also myjoyonline.com and a dozen affiliates across the country. We'll be on Joy Prime as well, and we're live on YouTube. We're also live on Facebook and Twitter as well. It's a good time to get interactive. The show is all about you, so do well to send your questions. The Information Minister will give you answers to all those nagging questions whilst we wait for update number 10, is it, from the President Akufo-Addo. We'll get that shortly also here on Beyond the Lockdown. But let's get into the next batch of questions at this point. Now, Adam in North Kanishi says, citing the executive order on social gathering, recently I was at the Ghana Police Training School at Tesano. Some trainees almost always gather at the police church building around 6 p.m. every night. The police above the law. What are the authorities saying about this gathering? Adam in North Kanishi sends that one. And this one says, hi, Mr. Ponkruma, kindly comment on how the president intends to support private teachers, because I feel the government could have done something to support us. If nurses were already being paid, still receive 50% addition, why can't the government do something little to support? It goes on and on. Thank you very much for that one. So we have another one. This one says, if the final year students are made to go back to school and some students contract the disease before the final exams, will those students be allowed to write? Hello, good evening. I'd like to ask the Minister about those who registered for NOVDEC exams. Is there any plan for them since they'll also be writing the exam this year? Quite a mixed bag there.
It is.
Edem is raising concerns
Starting with the Ghana police, I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the first things will be to draw the attention of the police administration to this. They are supposed to be the enforcers of law. And if indeed this claim, which we haven't validated yet, coming from Edem is true, the police administration will be in the best position to start charity from home. They say charity begins at home. So I think we quickly have to refer to the IGP and IFIA, etc., who are the police service. There's a question about support for private teachers, and I think it's important to explain that because we're talking of private teachers at a time when I think the texter is also talking of nurses. You know, the health workers are in various categories. We've talked about all health workers, we've talked about those who are frontline, we've talked about those who are doing contact tracing. When you talk of private teachers, the government has not started giving paychecks or is not giving paychecks to individuals of any category because they have lost their jobs. What the government has been doing is to give credit support to businesses, not individuals. So for private teachers who work in these schools, which qualify as businesses, it will be a good time for these schools to apply, maybe for the COVID-19 Alleviation Fund program of about now about 1 billion Ghana cedis, to apply. And if indeed they are compliant, i.e. they are registered with local authorities, they were paying their taxes, they were complying with other regulations when times were good, they should be in a position to be properly examined and a determination made whether or not they qualify for some sort of credit to the institution. And the institution, if it is minded that it is also paying teachers as part of the support that it is getting in these hard times, it can do so. But the government, I'm not aware, has been in the business of lending a hand to, let's say, private teachers or employees of a particular private organization, etc. No, that is not happening. Some jurisdictions like America, etc., are giving paychecks. But even those paychecks, I'm not too sure if it's for staff of private organizations. So I'd like to guide our colleague accordingly.
Okay, so this one was also on final year students and when they come back and they write exams and they get contracted. And then also the issue about NOVDEC, they've also registered. If they come back, do we have plans for them as well?
I see a trick question in there because the way the question is structured, if I go and say final year students, if they write an XYZ, they say, hey, the minister has confirmed that final year students are going to school. No, I haven't said that. I think the thing here is the bigger question of what optimally should be put in place to ensure that there's enough protection on campuses if students or some categories of students are going to go into school. So hypothetical, assuming final year students are going to go into school, what does that mean for the protection levels? If indeed it is the case that final year students alone are going to go into school, that would be a good idea because then you have, let's say, a third of the school population occupying the whole school. Therefore, you can spread them out a bit more and ensure that there's a lot of social distancing on campuses. I would be surprised if an arrangement like that does not come with things like the basic preventive instruments that you need on campus. Are they masks? Are they hand sanitizers? Are they Veronica buckets? Whatever. Indeed, you would even expect that some sort of health arrangements be made to screen students on campus and isolate students on campus should there be an incident. So if indeed that will be the path, you can be rest assured that President Akufo-Addo will have to put together an entire package that ensures that all of these layers are responded to. When he speaks to us tonight, if that decision is the case, I'm sure he will explain it to us.
Okay. We've still not heard from the Ghana Medical Association on this. I've been quizzing them on why we haven't heard anything so far, when especially we're expecting the president to also address. But definitely, I'm sure we'll hear from them after the president addresses the nation. And it's almost time for that. I'll give you the time shortly when we have to go to the Jubilee House for that presidential address. But let's get to our next batch of questions.
Yeah.
I am Jim Albert from Akufu. And please, with the easing of the restrictions, how prepared is government and what measures are being put in place if in case school are to be reopened?
My name is Bright Kodia, speaking from Nkoko. I'd like to find out from the Information Minister how far they have gone with coming up with the rapid diagnosis test, which was innovated by Joynewstv. I also would want him to update us progress so far in terms of the protocols in making sure that this particular test kit is available, so that we can enhance our capacity in testing. Also, is government also considering putting tertiary institutions into tracks, so that at least we can avoid the overcrowding whilst at school, because our schools are really crowded, and if we want to control spread, if there's a need that school open, we need to make sure that this physical distancing and all the other protocols are ensured.
My name is Iman Oba. I want to ask the Information Minister when the 50% the President promised is going to be delivered, because subsequent months have passed and frontline health workers were hoping to get the 50% on their salary, but still it looks like we've not gotten anything. So when is that promise going to happen?
Talking about easing of restrictions, it's a very good idea, but you see, we have two sides of the coin, and we expect the government to take both sides of the coins, consider one of them, see the positives and the negatives in it, because just recently we had the spokesperson of the National Chief Imam Sheikh Adoniao saying that for the chief imam's perspective, the government shouldn't open just like that, because some people are just giving him pressure because they want to achieve their selfish gains, and it's indeed true. But talking of school, I mean, how are students schooling go on? I mean, it will be some sort of shift system, and maybe that shift system is that during break times, I don't know, assembly, all those things, because will they all go through social distancing and stuff? And we're all expecting nothing but the best, and we're hoping on the president to give us what we want, whether it's either an extension or
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Eva in Tamale. Please, there is a rumor circulating that you are going to ask final years to go back to school to write their exams. And I know there will be a precautionary measures that will be put in place for us to protect ourselves from this deadly virus COVID-19 by wearing masks and maybe distancing us, washing our hands and others. But my question is the hostels, because I know, we are not many, so they will put us maybe 2-3 in a room, and we will be protecting ourselves with the face masks when we are not asleep. But my question is based on when we are sleeping. When we are sleeping, we can't put on the face mask. And at that time, if someone is coughing, you can't get up to cover your mouth, because maybe by then you may be deeply asleep. So I want to know what can be done to protect each and every one from this deadly virus. When we go back to our various hostels and we are being put in maybe 2-3 and you are sleeping, how do you then protect yourself from contracting this virus, COVID-19?
Okay, so the first question is on the progress on the Joynewstv test kit. Some time ago, we launched that. Where are we with it, and when will it be available?
So my understanding is that the FDA has been doing some sensitivity analysis of it, and you need some very high sensitivity levels to be used. The brief as I have it is that the sensitivity levels are not where they would want it to be. And so they are not in a position now to recommend that for you for full usage, and they may have to do some further work on it, because these RDT kits have the tendency to give you what they call false negatives or false positives sometimes, and you need to reduce that to a very low level. If it's maybe about 5% thereabout, then you have 95% potential accuracy rate, then you can go ahead and use it. But if that false positive or false negative sensitivity band is maybe 15%, etc., you could find yourself in a tricky spot. So they still have to do some work on it, and when they are confident, they will be speaking to us about it.
And you have a lot of students texting today asking, this one is also asking about tertiary students, whether they'll be put into tracks, for instance. Let me box all the education questions together. And there was one who's also saying that they've been told that final year students will be required to write the exams, and that when they are sleeping, what will happen? But during the day, they say they'll be wearing masks, they'll be put in hostels. How are they going to protect themselves?
So I think what will happen is that after the president speaks to us tonight, as I mentioned earlier, at the time I was leaving the Jubilee House, it was on the cards for tonight, hopefully around 10 p.m. Not necessarily the first artwork that was put out, because that's obviously not from us. Our team, I understand,
that was 9:30. We have a new artwork that says 10 p.m.
Well, our team, and I think this is the genuine from our team, is putting out one for 10 p.m. When he's done, we're going to spend the whole of this coming week at the ministers' press briefings with various ministers, fleshing out the details of what it means for various sectors, and fully engaging with media across the country, answering questions so that people understand what it means for everybody. One of them is this question about what does it mean for the educational institutions? And as I've said earlier, the president's main concern has been that some level of instruction and administration of examination can take place, but at the same time, on the other side, safety is not compromised. What does it mean in the middle there? Which I mentioned to you that I'll be surprised if that does not come with an investment in protecting students, teachers, non-teaching staff. What does that mean? Masks, Veronica buckets, disinfection of schools on a certain regular basis, a full gamut of things that ensure that if indeed just a particular cohort will go into school, they are well protected. So I'd like to ask all our students who are watching us and listening that we don't have to be in a rush. Let's just tarry for a while, let the president speak, and after that, whatever the final direction is, we'll have an opportunity to have the various ministers provide that kind of detailed explanation.
I'm curious, you've been part of all the stakeholder engagements leading to the decision that will be announced tonight. Is the president under pressure?
No, the president is not under pressure. The president has been keen to hear from various stakeholder groups because he doesn't believe in making decisions without bringing people to the table and hearing from them and engaging with them, sometimes even in a very animated manner, if you know President Akufo-Addo very well, in a very animated manner about the science or the data that backs whatever suggestion is being made. And he has done this. The COVID-19 response team, the leads in various ministries who've been engaging with sectors have done a very extensive job. But it's not a job that is done under pressure. It's a job that is done with a desire to gather as much information. What I have with me here, I think is, for example, one of the briefs from the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce, if you can zoom into it. This is just one of those briefs from the Ghana National Chamber of Commerce outlining the various things that they would like to see. Financial cost and input supply, communication, employee management, several of them. And we've gone through this very extensive process. It's not one of pressure, but it's one of trying to understand what it means to every cohort and even engage and explain which is doable and which is not doable. It is in the midst of all of this that you come to what we described earlier at our press briefings as the line of best fit, which can ensure that all sites are well managed as we move forward. And the president would explain to us how he does that in a number of areas too.
And one of the many, many questions I've been hit with, you see my laptop here today, is the issue about religious activities. We're waiting for the president though, but what do we know? I'm sure you've talked about the Ghana Chamber of Commerce, you've been engaging them. Have you been engaging the religious leaders as well, and what exactly is the conclusion? The
last time I was here, you recall, we had Reverend Sam Kranchankra and several other leaders speak to the recommendations that they had made. They prepared a very extensive dossier of recommendations, and they have had opportunity to speak to it. You have all kinds of religious activities or religious bodies in this country, the Orthodox ones, the charismatic ones. You have those in the Islamic community, those in the non-Christian and non-Muslim bracket, Hindus and all other groups. And they've made very interesting proposals. In the end, the president will have to walk a fine line of ensuring that you allow, if indeed you will ease in the religious bloc, you allow some level of activity, but you are minded to ensure that the numbers, and B, the environment is controlled in a manner that doesn't put people at risk. I can see you listening attentively, hoping that something will drop. But essentially, this is the big framework within which the president has been trying to strike a certain balance. First of all, if he does ease any restrictions, it's not by force that everybody should go into any of these activities. You still have your liberties to choose not to be part of these activities. But if indeed he eases some restrictions in the religious space, he will be minded to balance the numbers and the environment with the risks. And as I mentioned earlier, how any leader walks this tightrope balance is the test of your leadership. And we can all be hopeful that the same level of seriousness and may I say critique with which he's approached all of these decisions, he will apply tonight as he deals with even this question of religious engagement. But there's been extensive engagement. We are very grateful to the religious community for their support and their participation in all that has gone on so far. If the decisions don't go 100% like how you expected or wanted them, please bear in mind that the president has had to listen to you and listen to the doctors and listen to everybody else in arriving at a line of best fit, which ensures that people's religious liberties and desires are not unnecessarily hampered, but at the same time, most importantly, the safety of people is not injured in any way.
There's a main political issue that I'll be raising with you shortly, but let's test the pulse of the nation. We've been interacting with some people on their readiness when it comes to the easing of restrictions.
And then we have vulnerable children. It's very difficult to control such children with this pandemic. I will plead some of the restrictions must be maintained still, so as to curtail this virus issue. Because let's look at the number of our children in the classrooms. Are we going to run shift? Some of them can be controlled, yes, to an extent, but the rest cannot be controlled, especially when you're on break. How do you handle them? Nose masks and whatever. Do you think they can keep to it? So to me alone, I think we should hold on a while.
Okay. No, for schools, even the children and then taking care of them in this situation, the teachers can't take good care of the children.
I think that the government should extend the bundles more, because we are not secure. For this thing, for the social media, you can see around that most of the people, they didn't wear the nose mask around. They are just walking on the street just like that. So to me, I prefer that you should extend the distance more. To open the school and things, I don't think that the schools, the teachers will be prepared for those sanitizers and those small things for the school children. So to me, I think that you should extend the distance more.
Government is supposed to take a good measures before you can lift this ban, because sickness is the coronavirus the case is also increasing every day, every hour, and I think that it should put a stop on certain measures before he can even come out with lifting the ban.
I don't think it is time for the ban to be lifted now, as at now.
Why?
Because if you look at other countries, some foreign countries, some of them lifted it, and you know what happens at their schools. And even we, the Africans, just look. I don't think it is right for us. We should give it time. We should give time.
No, for now, I don't think we are ready for this. Because even now, people are not even doing the social distancing. They're putting on the nose masks and stuff. In trotros, people are sitting just like that. And it's not fair, because the way the churches and the schools are also giving the president pressure to open up the schools and churches, I don't think it's the best. For now, we are not ready.
The figures are still going up. When the figure was low, they implemented or they brought a lockdown and then a ban. Now the figures are still going up. You said the ban should go off. Which is which? Are they deceiving us or what? If it's coming down, or if their graph is coming down, at least the ban, if it's off, fine. But as the graph is still going up, they should not lift any ban.
Do you believe that the virus exists?
No, it's not. If it is, like by now, all of us we would have gone. I'm not sure if the corona is still in Ghana yet.
The school children they are young, and they are also, some of them too don't know much idea or knowledge about this. So I suggest that it should be extended to maybe next month.
Any other comments stood out for you?
Yes. So I think about 3 things we just need to speak to in that potpourri. Thanks for your production team for gathering it for us. First is that there are people who have this impression that we are going to be lifting a ban. That is not what is happening. And I think we have to be very careful of the expressions we use and people's understanding of it. The president has spoken about a potential easing of some of the restrictions. It's not lifting the ban. So for example, if you said that religious activities are banned, and you have signaled that you may want to ease some of those restrictions, what does it mean? That you allow, I don't know, is it a 30-minute religious activity of a particular number, or that you've lifted it that everybody can go back? They are 2 different things, and I think that we have to be continuous in education of the public, that we're talking about easing some of the restrictions. Number 2, what you will find many countries doing all over the world, and what I believe the kind of engagements here in Ghana have been around, is about how do you face this so that you don't start one day and say everything is opened up.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to face it over a period. What can you deal with immediately? What do you need some more time to put things in place? So people have forgotten that, for example, we've closed our borders. So
we have questions on that.
Well, so what does it mean for our borders? Are you going to have some phased activity, or you're going to keep the ban on the closure of the borders, or the closure of the borders for a while? So I think we have to be clear that we're not talking about lifting of the ban simpliciter.
Do we have a decision on that tonight?
On the
2-week extension expires today.
Well, yes, to the extent that it expires today, you can be damn sure you hear the president speak about the closure of the borders. He would explain to us what he intends to do with the closure of the borders.
Okay.
But I think that is just to explain and to get this context right, that it is not a lifting of the ban. It is the easing of some restrictions that the president has hinted that he may potentially do. And as I've hinted earlier, if indeed we go according to plan, and by 10 p.m. nothing changes, and he speaks to us with an update, and if he chooses to go ahead with some of those based on all the, because the advice keeps coming in, etc., we will see where he goes with that. On Friday, he held an emergency cabinet meeting to put some of the proposals before cabinet from the COVID-19 task force. Cabinet had an opportunity to weigh in. You know, cabinet by the constitution assists the president in making policy decisions. So you can all weigh in and give him your views and various contexts, and then he will take it under advisement before making his final decisions.
What were the views?
Several views. The whole plethora of views, those who are in agreement with some of the proposals, those who think some of the proposals should be amended, etc., etc. But the president, and a good president, must have the opportunity to get this advice and then come to a certain position, which is what he would speak to us about tonight after he's made those decisions. There's another comment about if we were here and there was a lockdown in Accra and Kumasi, why are we here and the lockdown doesn't still exist, or we're talking about potential easing? Let us remind our viewers and our listeners that the lockdown of Accra and Kumasi were not because we had a certain specific number of cases. I think we've said it over and over again, but the feedback suggests that we have to do some more education. It was to afford the health authorities an opportunity to go out and get ahead of the virus. Remember that we needed to even know what our infection rate was or what our positivity rate was. Prior to that, we didn't even know. That was the time that we found out that our positivity rate was less than 3%. Today, it's still just about I think last time I checked, about 3.5% or so, because of the other measures we have put in place. So you cannot do an extrapolation from that at X we lock down Accra and Kumasi, and therefore at Y we should be locking down some more. No, in our instance, the precautionary lockdown earlier was to afford our people the opportunity to get early data to inform all of us. Nonetheless, we have said that moving forward, should we find incidents of such a spike in a locality that we have to impose a lockdown and a curfew, they won't hesitate to do so. Since then, what has happened? You've had spikes in, let's say, Tema at the factory, which has now been contained. You are not recording new cases from there anymore. In the eastern region, I think or so, in the eastern region, and it's now been so contained that my understanding, the brief I have, is that later this week they'll reopen that a factory because it's been so contained. The persons who were infected, treated, recovered, no new cases. You don't have any basis to say that you're going to lock down a bit further. Go to Obuasi, they have contained. Now the attention is on Takwa and parts of the western region, where again they are moving in teams to ensure that they have containment there. So all of this must be properly contextualized, and it's not a simple matter of saying that the number was 4 and we locked down enough, therefore it's 6 and we should lock down some more. Then the last question I think was about something that he said was not true. I kind of have skipped exactly what it was, but maybe if we have an opportunity later, I would go to.
Are we easing some of these restrictions possibly because we want the EC, or the governing NPP is backing the EC's decision to compile a new voters register, for instance? And I'm sure this is an issue that has dominated discussion over the week, and also the NIA. We need a card to register for the EC's exercise. Is that the reason why we're easing some of these restrictions?
We have said over and over again that the decisions that are being made, and that's why we take time to explain how we have arrived at these decisions. The dynamics of the virus, baseline data on infection rates, positivity, etc. The decisions we've made so far have been backed by the data and the science, first in the health area, and the data and the science in various other areas. We are not taking a decision based on politics. If we were taking a decision based on politics, by now we should have done something else that allows maybe some sort of political activity. The president himself has had to suspend his political activities. Indeed, his regional tours, I'm very much aware that he had one of the regional tours slated about a week or two before the initial lockdown. He's had to suspend all of those ones. His party's activities have been suspended. So politics can wait. Human lives and the economy subsequently will take precedence over politics. But I've heard people suggest that the EC or the NIA are necessarily affected by some of the things that have been said. Yes, generally, the EC and the NIA are affected by all the things that we're talking about. And in the end, we expect that whatever the EC and the NIA come up with, especially in this year of elections, does not go to the detriment of the average Ghanaian. But I am not too sure that these conversations we're having necessarily are informed about what the EC or the NIA seek to do. What the EC or the NIA or anybody else will want to do will have to be as a consequence of where we are going. So if where we are going says that we're doing X or Y or Z, all other bodies will have to draw from where we are going and come up with the kind of preventive etiquette and safety protocols that are relevant for their cause. Bear in mind that I think we are clear in our minds that this election 2020 must happen. Countries have had this election in the midst of this pandemic. The question is, how do we prepare ourselves to have an election in the midst of this pandemic and in a manner that we can protect our population? And how the EC and the NIA or any other body, the police, the election security task force, observers, everybody, how they all come to this position is one that will be available for all of us to examine.
And you can say for a fact that during the consultations and all these, the issue about the Electoral Commission did not make a showing.
No, I know that the EC has engaged the health experts on what suffices if they should go ahead with their work. But that is like any other group engaging to get guidance from them. At the central committee where the president sits with his team taking a decision, the decisions are not driven by the interests of the EC or the NIA. The decisions are driven by what is prudent to protect lives on one front and at the same time allow some sense of normalcy in the Ghanaian jurisdiction.
Okay, let's go back for the final batch of questions, I should say, then we can wrap up the discussion whilst we wait for the presidential address at 10 p.m. This one from WhatsApp, Bayeti from Kumasi says, I want to humbly ask if the EC continues to do the registration, what will happen to those in isolation centers? Will they follow them in the hospitals to do the registration for them? And this one says, a lot of us here in Dubai are home and life has been very hard due to the virus and the closure of some companies. All we're asking the government to do is open the borders. People are dying of hunger and anxiety. Some people are even sleeping outside because many offices have been closed and they cannot pay for accommodation. We are stranded. And this one from Facebook, Adomba Kwating Collins says, please ask the minister, when will 2017 nurses, both diploma and degree nurses, granted financial clearance will commence work? Because currently we have shortage of nurses in the system. For instance, now at Dubiase Hospital, one nurse is caring for 40 patients. We had a series of demonstrations and engagements with the stakeholders, and they told us that new nurses are coming. Please, when are they coming? Courage Kweku Jandu says, we have been told that there are 800 people in isolation centers. This means 4,000 are home. Why do they never say that but make you feel everyone is in isolation at the designated centers? This is my simple question from Courage. Marshal Nana Boachi Yadom Shadrach says, so what happens if restrictions are lifted and there's a surge in the COVID-19 cases? Yeboah Benjamin says, what have we achieved with the restrictions being put in place, and what are we going to do differently to prevent the escalation of the rate of spread should the president relax the restrictions? Yeboah Benjamin, we'll start with your question. What have we achieved with the restrictions?
No, what we've achieved with the restrictions so far, that is the restrictions on travel into and out of Ghana as a first level, restrictions on social gatherings, and as a third level, what I'll call the preventive etiquette. What we've achieved so far is limiting our positivity rate to somewhere around 3.5%. We're still under 5% there. It's been one major achievement. What else have we achieved? Ensuring that our mortality rate is very low, because of the kind of enhanced testing we've put in place and finding people early when they are asymptomatic so that they can be treated. What are we doing to prevent spread? What we are doing to prevent spread is still threefold: closure of the borders, some restrictions on movement, and then asking people to oblige the personal preventive etiquette. Now, what we are talking about is that, can you ease some of these? Which ones can you ease without compromising the spread of about 3.6 thereabout? That is what we are doing, and what we are encouraging people to do most importantly is to oblige. There are lots of people who are of the view that maybe what should happen is that everybody should be locked down so that everything is fine. But that is not feasible ad infinitum. You're going to have to ease a little bit and allow people to go about a few activities, but people should oblige the preventive etiquette so that they ensure that they don't become part of the statistics. And I think that that is key. There's another question about cases going up. And in fact, to the extent that we continue testing as aggressively as we're testing, we will find some more positive cases. Today is 7,881, I think, as at the time we're speaking. If tomorrow morning we continue testing another 4,000 people, we find one, it will move to 7,882. But the real issue is not whether it's moved to 7,882. The real issue is, what is the dynamic of the virus that is playing here in Ghana? Are people necessarily dying of it, or are we doing our management in such a way that mortality rate is being kept low? And I did say earlier that one death even is one death too many. So to the extent that we continue with testing, the numbers, the cumulative case count may go up, but active case may be at an optimal level, and beyond that, mortality rate, as we seek to keep them low, we will do our best to keep them low.
Okay.
There's a question about 4,000 people at home, but we keep talking about 800 in isolation. When we say isolation, isolation does not only mean the isolation center, properly so-called, that you see in a particular designated area. The 4,000 persons who are at home by this number are supposed to be in isolation at home. It is determined after the Ghana Health Service has done a profiling of who you are, where you live, do you have the facilities to self-isolate at home, and even your personal propensity to obey the self-isolation rules. These are clinicians with psychologists, etc. involved, and they're able to come to a certain determination that this person is most likely going to abide by it. We have had instances where people are programmed for isolation at home, and even the family gives us feedback that no, he can't isolate at home, pick him up, and we've proceeded to pick him up. We've had instances where people have been programmed to be isolated at home, and later changes have had to be made. So the 4,000 or so persons who are supposed to be in isolation at home are being monitored, but it is done after profiling, and if there's any basis to change that, you change that, because you have to have a balance where you don't overwhelm your medical facilities as well, as was done in Italy and other places. A question about 2017 final clearance.
Yeah, for New Dubiase.
To get financial clearance, MFI, you need to ensure that the resource capacity can accommodate them. One of the last things that we want to have is promising people jobs, giving them letters from the Ghana Health Service that they've been given jobs. And for us, going back to the same situation we had a few years ago where people have jobs, but for a year and a half and 2 years down the line, they have not been paid. It's not fair to them. So what we are doing is to ensure that the books are good and that we can pay these persons and we recruit them. That's the whole concept of financial clearance. What COVID-19 has done, it has affected the revenues of the state and the resources available. So the Ghana Health Service, the Ministry of Health, the Finance Ministry continue to examine how much they can feasibly accommodate and then proceed to give that clearance as they go along. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that our colleagues who are waiting to be onboarded can be onboarded in good time once those financial hurdles are jumped.
Okay, so there was one also on what happens if restrictions are lifted and there's a surge in the COVID-19 cases, and one also from those abroad being stranded. Do we have any plans for them?
So we have mentioned that we continue to gather data on Ghanaians living abroad and those of them who may have an interest in coming back into the Ghanaian jurisdiction. It has to be done without compromising the work that has been done so far and the health of the Ghanaian population, the general population here in Ghana. And you have to ask yourself a few questions. If you say those who are abroad should come back home, what does it mean? Are you going to ask them to be tested out there before they get back home? And how well can you rely on the test out there? And I remember discussing this with you 3 weeks ago. And in the Kuwaiti situation as was tested, 35 of them, after we were told had been tested out there and had tested negative, 35 of them have tested positive here. So how well can you trust?
What could have gone wrong?
I don't know. How well can you trust all of these supposed testing claims? Because different countries are using different testing parameters. How well can you trust all of these testing parameters globally? Flip the coin. If you said you didn't want to do that, and you want to do the second level assurance we did in Ghana, that, okay, let them come and then we'll test them and isolate them. On a normal day, the data from the Ghana Airport Company Limited is that you have about 7,000 people coming through the Kotoka International Airport only. 7,000 people. In a week, close to 50,000 people. I mean, if in 2 weeks you had 100,000 people coming in, where would you, mandatorily quarantine all of these people? Can you afford to do that? So it is not a simple decision like that, and that is why they continue to examine it on a cohort by cohort basis. I've seen some artwork flying on social media that Ghanaians in Nigeria and other places are to be evacuated at a particular cost. We've been trying from our ministry to get validation of that. We don't have any validation to that. So what I can say to you for now is that it continues to be examined on a cohort by cohort basis. And if the state is of the view that at any point in time some persons can be brought in or can be admitted in a manner that doesn't compromise the general safety, a decision will be made and will be announced to the Ghanaian public.
Well, we've always encouraged you to be interactive whilst you are on Beyond the Lockdown, because the show is yours, for you to ask all the nagging questions for the Information Minister to provide answers. And I would remind you once again that the President will be addressing the nation at 10 p.m. and it will be live here on the Joynews channel and all our platforms as well. So let's go live to Facebook now. We're live, we're streaming live there, and some of your questions are popping up. Yakubu Sadiq says, MFA, please ask the Information Minister that if the President allows the final year students to go back to school, how many months will they use to study before writing the exams? Yakubu Sadiq's question there. We'll take another one, or we'll get answers to that. Okay, so let's get an answer.
If my brief is correct, the final years in senior high school, for example, who are supposed to write their exam, if my brief is correct, had just about 3 weeks more to go before writing their exam. And then you have the gold track that had not finished their term. They also had, I think, about 3 more weeks or so to finish their term. So I think the question will be, can you allow a system that allows these final years and maybe the gold track to come in for a certain number of weeks and finish and write their exams? That is how you have to narrow the decision point, assuming you are operating within that frame without compromising all of the other gains that we have made.
Is there anything of the sort also for BEC candidates as well? Because you've just talked about
I don't quite recall what the brief is on the BEC candidate. The senior high school ones are the ones that I quite recall. But again, it is within the same framework. How many weeks are they left with? How do you ensure that they can be given the necessary assistance to prepare and to write their exams? Assuming you're going to go that way.
Well, we'll go back to Facebook.
Those assumptions are important.
I know. We'll get more questions on Facebook. You're live and interactive. We have the all clear. So Rasmoro Atipo says, I fear the opening of churches than schools. In schools, common sense and discipline can be enforced to some extent. But in the churches, once the pastor said he has seen a vision, that handshake can heal COVID patients without hesitation. The congregation will jump and embrace one another. Rasmoro, I'm sure you don't go to church. So he's talking about fearing that.
But I mean, for churches, and I'm not saying that is what is going on, but churches are one of the most well-managed groups that you'll find in our country. You go to a church, you have the pastor, you have various levels of authority in the churches, in the mosques as well, the imam, and then the acolytes, etc. So it shouldn't be impossible to calibrate something that the church also will take responsibility for so far. And I think we should also at some point trust our church leaders with some confidence, because, for example, so far, they have been phenomenal in the kind of support and compliance they've come up with so far. Can you trust them a bit more with maybe just a step further without going full throttle? Those are considerations we shouldn't shy away from as a country.
And already we've started seeing some interventions being put in place by some of the churches. They've started, spacing out seatings and providing temperature guns and Veronica buckets and all, hoping that some of these restrictions will be, eased tonight by the president. We'll go back and take some more of your comments. Teddy Nyako says, I know all other sectors have been hit hard globally, but my question is, what are plans being made by government for travel and tourism industry? Travel and tourism industry.
Travel and tourism, if you're referring to international travel and tourism, it's something you can't do alone as a country. You have to calibrate it with what the global travel systems are looking to do at this point in time. We have learned that the first point of risk has been the risk of importation of these cases. And so whatever you want to do with your borders, you have to check what is happening around the world. You have to check where your people usually travel to and from. In Ghana, people usually travel to and from North America and Europe and Asia. What is the risk levels in these countries? What is the testing regimes in these countries? Those are some of the considerations that you have to come to when you are trying to decide on travel and tourism. But yes, back home, the industry has been very badly hit. My colleague, the Minister for Tourism, the Honorable Barbara Otinjesi, has done a very elaborate presentation to Cabinet speaking of the impact of this COVID-19 on her sector and the kind of, may I say, alleviation or support that they would require to bounce back eventually, because like the President keeps saying, we hope that this too shall pass. Eventually, when that happens, how do we re-engineer the buoyancy of the tourism sector when the world has come to a certain level of normalcy? It's being looked at, but immediately, whatever you have to do, you have to look at the global travel system and be sure that you're not putting your population at risk.
Okay, so I have a question also from Badri Dean, and he's asking that Arabic teachers have not received payment for the past 5 months. Is there anything that we're doing about it? This one also is asking about savings and loans, those who were affected by the collapse of some of these banks. We know the last time we spoke about it, the receiver doing their work. They're asking when they would get their funds.
So Arabic teachers, we would need to, because it's coming in fresh, I don't have a brief from the Honorable Mustafa Abdul Hamid. I'll need to quickly get him a brief. So maybe during the week we can have you give your audiences some feedback on that. Clients of savings and loans companies whose liabilities have been validated are supposed to be paid in cash or in bonds before the end of May. That is a brief that the receiver, Ms. Eric Nipa, gave us, which we shared with the country. For those from fund management companies, we don't have a brief on that yet, but I explained to you last time that the understanding is that there are a lot of savings and loans companies that also deposited money with fund management companies. So when you take off the savings and loans companies, a good chunk of it will seep into the fund management companies, and then you can understand what the level of gap there is, and beyond what the law caps, then you can proceed to intervene there. So that's the brief I have on those
So I have an interesting question also from Juliet Bakata, and she says that is it true that the COVID-19 does not kill in Ghana, but the deaths are due to their underlying health conditions?
So I have to be very, very accurate here. we do not have a brief today that says that these 36 persons or so that have died primarily because of COVID-19. What the doctors tell us is that they are COVID-19 associated deaths or COVID-19 related deaths. And it is because virtually a good chunk of them had what they call comorbidities or underlying health conditions, which on their own could have led to their passing on. And they are not able to clinically say to us as at now that cause of death is COVID-19. If that is what Juliet is asking, then she will be correct, because they have not told us that these deaths were primarily caused by COVID-19. The expression they have used, and I'm being very accurate, the expression they have used that these are COVID-19 related deaths or COVID-19 associated deaths. Why we ask them, they say it's because they are not able to, by science, say that cause of death is COVID-19, and that's why they are limited, and that's why they express it this way.
Okay, so this one from Robert Kabute says, I hope to hear the information minister say he will open mass testing centers at the various district hospitals before easing the measures which have been in place so far. That's Robert Kabute's question. Are we opening mass testing centers at the various district hospitals? 2 quick comments to
that. Robert, it's not my place to open mass testing centers. But listen, the thing about mass testing, and as I've explained about testing, the Ghana decision is to test what we call at-risk populations. Because the science about testing is that you can test negative today and contract it even as you are exiting the door of the testing center. So testing is not immunity. Testing does not prevent you from getting it. The fact that you have tested negative today is not really cause for joy, because you could get it tomorrow. But at-risk populations are the ones that we focus on, because we believe that if anybody would have got it, they would have it by now. So the testing is focused on what we call at-risk populations, and that's why the contact tracing is important. So touch wood, if I test positive, it means that my contacts have to be traced because they are at risk, and then they are tested. It is, in our view, more prudent to do that than to just go somewhere and start testing people for testing's sake. A test costs about $50. So you test at-risk populations, and that is what we are doing currently. Indeed, some of the advice that has come in is that if you're going to reopen schools or allow some semblance of activity back in schools and other places, mass testing itself is not the answer, but putting in place systems that can quickly test at-risk populations, even in this scope, is what is more reliant. And I am optimistic that when the president speaks to us, if the decisions are going that way, he will hint at how we intend to put in place the health protocols along some of these areas. So
we have some questions also on WhatsApp raising questions about contact tracers and whether the allowances have been reduced, because some of them say, this was coming from Kumasi actually, and he says that instead of the 150, they are receiving 70, between 50 and 70 Ghana
We'll need to look at that. We'll need a few specifics, maybe the district in which that is happening, and then we can look into it some more. I'm not aware that it's been reduced to 70. My understanding is that it's 150 per head. If there's a particular district in which that is happening, they can share it with you for anonymity reasons, and then we can also go back and then check.
Okay, and Eddie says that I'm hoping to hear our president open the airport amid strict hygiene protocols, including mandatory quarantine for 14 days. And that's an issue that you've talked about. And Selom is also, this is from Selom asking how many testing centers we have currently at the last count.
I think the last time I checked, where they can do the test is about five or so the last time I checked, including KCCR, Noguchi, the Ghana Reference Lab, I think the Veterinary Lab, I think there's one in Tamale, and then I think another in Ho. So that brings us to about six or so, where they are able to run these PCR calibrated tests.
And government is still bearing the costs?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll be wrapping up at this point. I'm not satisfied. I'm hoping that we could go on and on till the president addresses the nation, but that's not possible. The president will be addressing the nation at 10 p.m. and it will be live here on the Joy News channel, also on myjoyonline.com, Joy 99.7 FM, or affiliates across the country. You need to leave your doubt right here. Joy News is free to air on your digital platforms. You want to catch that address. So finally, there's still some people who do not believe that coronavirus is real.
COVID-19 is real. It can kill you. You need to ensure that you follow the preventive etiquette that we are speaking about to protect yourself, even as the state is closing the borders or continues to close the borders and is imposing some restrictions. President Akufo-Addo has gone in the last 3 weeks through an elaborate stakeholder engagement exercise. He has himself announced that he's been considering easing some of the restrictions. And tonight when he speaks to us, he'll give us a general update of where we are. But as I've mentioned, don't be surprised if you hear him ease some specific restrictions. His key objective is to ensure that the health of the general population is not put at risk, but as much as possible, what we can allow some semblance of normalcy for, we are able so to do. He's approached this with the same level of diligence and decorum from the beginning, and we can trust that he will do so even at this time. We're grateful for your time, Mr. Kujo Nkrumah, and another exciting edition of Beyond the Lockdown will be on every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. here on the Joy News channel. But stay with us, we'll be back. The President Akufo-Addo, will be addressing the nation on easing some of the restrictions that are already in place. Have a good evening.